Little hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Hey there, friends! Welcome back to the JoAG Fancave. It's me, Kristin, the girl who's probably quitting this podcast after this episode, along with Corrigan, the person who's gonna make me quit this podcast after this episode, to discuss a film that is quite literally straight from my childhood nightmares. This month's offering was 2017's It, and it turns out that I actually was correct in my attempts to never view this film. Because like some kind of fucked up Goonies, we follow the 7 members of the Losers Club as they are tormented by this hellish shape-shifting clown throughout the town of Derry, Maine. And while Pennywise honestly should surely be enough for these children to deal with, they also have to fend off psychotic bullies and the actual worst human adults to walk this planet. So, all in all, it was pretty bleak, and I had to sleep with the light on. And that's not a joke.
Listen, can I tell you something? Just, man to man here on that note. I just want to reassure you that sometimes this happens to me too. And sometimes over very stupid things. Like last night, I watched a film called Ghost Shark, which this month or this week on the Hell Rankers podcast, they are doing for their first Trash Tuesday episode, Steve and Anna. They did this movie Ghost Shark. So I watched it last night. Silly, stupid movie, just the kind of like Sci-Fi Channel type stuff with like a very badly CGI'd shark that can like travel through water anywhere. So like a bathtub.
That's literally a childhood, right? I was convinced there was one in my pool my whole growing up. So.
Yep. There's one in a pool. There's a fire hydrant that it comes out of and eats small children.
Does it come out of the toilet?
Oh, yes. It's a very funny kill in which it comes out of the toilet. Well, you don't have to. See, this is how I would die, because there's no way that I can stop myself from going. But like the thing about it is because this shark can travel through like any form of water, it's kind of like unavoidable, right? And it's sort of got this like Final Destination feel to it where it's like you can't escape death. It's like the shark is going to get you because you're going to be near water at some point. So last night, I had a nightmare about Ghost Shark.
Sure. Naturally.
Woke up at 5 a.m. I had this nightmare that, have you heard of the movie Smile?
I have heard of it. And unfortunately, I think it was one of those trailers that played before a movie that I was like,
before everything.
In which universe am me seeing this film, which was, I don't even know what it was, but no way it had anything to do with Smile.
Yeah, it's, the sort of premise of this is that people see this like smiling figure and then like a week later, kind of like The Ring or whatever, they kill themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and smile as they do it, yes. But it would be a weird horror movie if that was it. Just 7 days later, they can't stop smiling. They're just really smiley after that.
I don't know.
It'd be off-putting for sure.
For your face.
But so I had like this dream where it was like a smile type situation, right? Okay. Where you would see this figure who was wearing a mask like Ethan Hawke wears in The Black Phone. And from there, what'd you say?
So should I Google that? The Black Phone?
The Black Phone, yeah. And so it's like this figure wearing a mask like that.
Ew.
Yeah, right? Totally. And if you saw it, you would die in like a Final Destination-y, Rube Goldberg-y kind of way. Because I don't know if you know anything about Final Destination, but in the Final Destination movies, it's never just like, and then you like die. Although like a girl gets hit by a bus, but it's always like, something catches fire and that lights something else on fire and then a whole bunch of things fall over and then you end up stabbed by something. Like it's always like a crazy, very convoluted death, right? And so if you saw this,
involved. This is a real Brienne dream you had.
It is a really Brienne dream. So in the dream, it was me and our friends Jerry and Monica and Michelle. And there's one sort of unidentified person. I don't know who that was. And Mackenzie Rossman, who was in Ghost Shark, but you would know her as Ruthie from Seventh Heaven. So Ruthie is in the dream, and first thing we see this guy, and for whatever reason, you know how there's a town called Grants Pass, Oregon?
Okay.
You've heard of Grants Pass, right? You've driven through it or whatever. Okay, well, there's towns called Grants Pass. For whatever reason, in the dream, it made perfect sense to be like, listen, you love Grants Pass, we're gonna go to the pass, and that's gonna get you away from this thing. And instead she just like immediately got like severed in half by something. And then we're like, well, that didn't work. And so then this thing is gonna like drown us, but we figure out how to like hold our breath for a really long time and get out of this situation. And then like Monica goes into the bathroom. This is Dream Monica is exactly like real life Monica. Monica goes into the bathroom and we go in after her, and she's lying on the floor in what looks like a pool of blood with like a broken toilet seat next to her, and we're like, oh no, Monica's dead. And then she starts laughing and gets up and is like, no, I was just kidding. And it's like ketchup. It's like, even in my dream, Monica is just fucking with us. But I like finally wake up from this dream and like, you know, still in that state where I'm like, I remember all of this. So I just start writing it down because I'm like, this is unhinged. I'm like, why did I dream about this? This is such a bonkers dream. And then I thought about it and I was like, it's fucking Ghost Shark. That movie gave me a nightmare. Incredible stuff. So just so you know, it happens to us seasoned horror professionals too, Kristin.
Well, then good, I suppose. I guess
just
that makes me feel better.
Yeah, you had to sleep with the light on. I had a dream based on a bad CGI shark munching people.
You know?
But this was a big leap this month, Latty, and I'm proud of you for still being here, sitting before me, rather than still hiding under your blankets somewhere a week later. And honestly, I forgot how hard this movie goes from the jump. It goes straight in, obviously, with our boy Georgie and the severed arm, and then it never really like gives you a moment's rest. It's either showing you something very scary or something very sad / disturbing for the remainder
it's bleak.
Of the movie. It is bleak. It's extremely bleak.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's the thing. I just want you to understand why this was so hard for me. I have this core memory when I was a child that I was a Saturday morning, or whatever, Saturday, TV's on, I walk in, show is playing. To me, in hindsight, what I think happened is something else had been on. My dad got up to go do something and the TV just kept going. Because this is not like a thing he would watch.
It's no horses.
Right. It's not a 1950s Western. Tom's not watching it. This child is in like a rain slicker. It's raining. And he's like running down the street, chasing something. I'm not quite like, I kind of like walked in and I was like, oh, what's this kid? Oh, it's a kid. I'll watch it. And then he stops at the storm drain and is talking to something in the storm drain. And I'm like, okay. And then it like zooms in and it's this like really creepy clown. And I don't remember their exchange, but I remember thinking like, ooh, love that. I don't know.
Loving this situation.
I'm getting this here, right? And then what happened was the clown got these big metal teeth, and then it like the kid screams and something happens, and then it flashes to like a frame with like blood dripping down it. And I was
you remember this really well.
Yeah, Corey, because it's literally a core memory to the point where I cannot stand in front of storm drains. They make me physically uncomfortable. The hair stands up on the back of my neck. I get goosebumps. I like can't do it. And I felt always silly about it, especially when I was in high school and like in 20, in my 20s. I'm like, Kristin, this is silly. That probably wasn't, you probably just made that up anyway.
Oh,
it's
you
not
did
even
not
really real. And then sure fucking enough, you make me watch this movie and it's raining when it starts. And I was like, oh, she said it took place in the summer. That's probably nothing to worry about. And then he was wearing the rain slicker and I was like, oh.
So did you never realize that you had seen the opening scene of it?
So I did, but I thought that, I assumed I did because what else would it be?
Sure.
But also I thought that it wasn't like
really, you'd embellish
I must have embellished this, right? But
right,
I deeply remember the picture frame with the blood. Like I remember all of that. And then to have them this like very long seated fear of like walking past the storm drain, because like literally every time I was like, oh no, those are dangerous. Clowns live there and eat children. And then to watch this movie, which was different in that it wasn't metal teeth, it was real teeth.
Yeah, regular
and you
teeth.
see him like bite his fucking arm off. And I was like, oh, so that wasn't a dream that I had as a child that I created. Like this was real. And I was correct all along.
Which, that's interesting though that you bring up the actually showing the biting the arm off, because in my core terrifying memory of it, I thought you saw it in the original, and in my brain I had like this vivid idea of seeing Georgie's arm get ripped off. And then I rewatched the miniseries like 5 or 6 years ago for the first time since I was in, third grade or whatever. Sure. And I was like, oh, you don't actually see it. Yeah. My brain just filled that in.
Yeah.
And kept that with me all these years. But yes, then Andy Muschietti went ahead and fixed that for us and showed us the arm getting ripped off.
Fix is the word I would use.
Maybe not.
But I just want you to know that it was it was like visceral for like my
right.
body.
They was like, oh no, I'm returning to this.
And like when it was happening, I was like, oh no, like oh no, and it just kept going from there. And so that is why I've been so scared of this film.
Got it. Yep. Yeah.
Not like Chucky, where it was just sort of like that was creepy. I never want to watch it.
Yeah. Right.
It's like it's a part of me.
You actually did see part of it, and it scarred you for
and I honestly,
30 years.
I have to believe that my dad came back in later and like was like, oh god, and probably changed it. Looked around, was like, oh, okay, no one's here.
Good thing, good save.
Well, good thing I saved it. Right, Patty would have killed me.
And you were just too scared to ever mention
and I'm just,
it. You're like, we must never
in my room,
speak
like,
of this again.
Well, that was the thing too, where I'm like, I can't vocalize it. If I vocalize it, it becomes real. And a big thing about this movie, as we're going to go through a little bit later, is I have a lot of questions, and I feel like I can't really confront my fears that this movie brought out because there aren't answers.
Okay. Well, we'll work on that. We will try to assuage some of that by answering as many of your questions as possible. Is this your first Stephen King horror? Because I'm sure you've seen stuff like The Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption and stuff like that.
Yes, I have seen those.
Right, but and like those are in your wheelhouse. But horror-wise, is this your first Stephen King horror?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Amazing. Obviously,
know nothing about him. So if there's a lot of Easter eggs in here,
we're gonna get into that.
I didn't get any of
them. We're talking here about basically the patron saint of modern horror, horror's granddaddy. Love him or hate him, doesn't matter. He's been doing this thing forever. He's been doing it prolifically, and he's influenced the horror landscape like few others have. To deny the king has had a hand in shaping both the content of horror for the past half century, and its popularity is to be willfully obtuse. So, given his outsized influence on the media that we have based this podcast around, I thought I'd give you a little background on it, on King, and on the Macroverse that he's created.
Okay, so like the King cinematic, or book universe.
Yeah, it's like, that's the thing, is it obviously crosses platforms. It's the literary, comic, cinematic universe. He's got his hands in all of those things. So yeah, there's comics, everything, all over the place. And I'm only going to scratch the surface here because there are like literally entire books and YouTube channels and podcasts dedicated solely to King's books and all of that kind of stuff. Like, he is very well taken apart by other people, and I can't get near that. I'm giving you King 101, King Survey.
Great. I don't want to take 201, so just...
Right, we're just gonna,
let's do it.
Don't know how many of these I will ever be able to get you to watch again, so,
Well, you should have started off with maybe a lighter one, and then I might have been more open to it.
Okay. Go with Stand By Me, and then see what happens.
Seems like a you problem, if I'm being honest. This is your fault. You did this. You're the problem. It's you.
Well, How dare you paraphrase Taylor Swift on my podcast? But anyway.
You know what? You fucking deserve it. So I don't see.
Fair.
And in the words of Mark, you're a horrible friend.
It's true. All right.
Fine.
Listen,
Tell me about this Yahoo.
I will tell
Just
you.
kidding. It's very lovely, I'm sure. I don't know.
He seems
Maybe
lovely.
I don't know.
Listen, I think even with little background on the guy, it goes without saying that Stephen King was born and predominantly raised in Maine.
Sure. The love letter to Maine, let me tell you.
Yeah, right. I don't know if love letter is the right word. But...
Okay. Yeah, he seems to hate everyone in Maine,
That's the
actually,
thing is,
now that
it's
I think
like-
about it.
Yeah, for a guy who, like, obviously absolutely loves Maine,
England,
never
yeah.
wants to leave Maine, you know?
Yeah.
He definitely writes as if it's the worst place on earth.
Right. Yeah, he paints a real bleak picture
does.
of the communities that you find in this
Yeah.
hellhole.
But he was born there in 1947, making him currently 76 years old. I know, right? I don't even like saying that. It stresses me out to think about that. But he had a modest upbringing after his dad headed out when he was a toddler, and his mother spent his childhood first as a caregiver for her parents, who were sickly and couldn't take care of themselves, and then once they passed, as a cook at a nearby facility for the intellectually disabled. By the way, a good chunk of this bio comes, I'm paraphrasing his own biography on his website with a few other sources mixed on in here. For his part, he began writing when he was just 6 or 7 years old and was deeply influenced by comic books and movies, along with just about any genre of book he could get his hands on. He started writing a weekly column for his university newspaper his sophomore year and got into politics, becoming fervently anti-war. And this is the late 60s at this point.
Sure.
So lucky for him, when the draft board came for him, he was counted out because of high blood pressure, bad eyesight, flat feet, and punctured eardrums. Which,
God.
fuck me, bud. I thought my body was a trap. Christ almighty.
Yeah.
And listen, I didn't add this in here, but also, I think in the late 90s or early 2000s, he was also hit by a van. And
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that. And I remember he bounced back. But
he bounced back. But yeah, it was really bad. So
Yeah.
he's had pain issues and things like that ever since then. So this guy is sort of certified nerd status, just nothing works, and he just likes to read and write his books, and they didn't want to send him to war, which worked fine with his views.
Yeah. He's great. I'm an indoor cat, man.
Exactly that. He is indoorsy. He married his wife Tabitha in 1971. They have 3 kids, Naomi, Owen, and Joe Hill, who is a prolific and popular horror author in his own right. In fact, you'll know him, Kristin, as the author of comic book turned Netflix series Lock and Key. Yep, Stephen King's son. Yeah.
Oh, good job, Joe.
I know, right?
I did like that.
Yeah.
So maybe I should read his stuff. Is it less scary?
I think it depends on what you're reading. He's co-written some stuff with Stephen King.
Well,
and
maybe not then. Maybe we're one and done with that one. Good job,
yeah,
Joe.
maybe. But great story there.
That's a good story. Oh, that
it
first
is.
season was...
Yeah.
Okay,
I never finished the second season, but it was solely because I couldn't remember the first season well enough, and I have to go back and watch it again.
Oh yeah.
I was
Well, it took so
it's been
long.
so long. Yeah.
And then and then the third season actually came out pretty quickly after the second, but then I also just I think I just forgot, and you reminded me. I'm like, okay, I should go back and
I should watch
revisit
that.
Anyway.
Yeah, I very much need to start at the beginning of Lock and Key because it was 2 or 3 years between seasons,
Yeah,
and I was
a long time.
I don't know what's happening here anymore.
Which
Who
is
are these
actually funny
people?
because the kid in Lock and Key played Georgie in it.
Yes, exactly. Look at all these little overlaps. It's almost like a Stephen King Macroverse. But anyways, they made ends meet with King working at an industrial laundry, and the rest of their income coming from Tabitha's student loans and his occasional sale of a story to a men's magazine. He went on to teach high school, as well as teaching writing on evenings and weekends, all while working on short stories and novels on the side. And the thing about King is that guy fucking grinds.
Yeah.
That schedule is unrelenting. Working every day of the week in high school, then working on nights and weekends, teaching and writing.
Writing at some point. Or
Yeah,
does he sleep or go to the bathroom?
Seriously.
But he doesn't. He's scared of Ghost Shark. I'm just kidding. Joke's on you guys.
There it is.
He's in a bag. I'm kidding. I don't know my bag. I don't know.
You heard it here first. But the thing about him is one thing he's always going to find time to do is write and read. Two things. He has a whole book about it called On Writing, which I highly recommend. His first published novel was Carrie in 1974, which provided him the funds to become a full-time writer. By the late 70s, he'd already turned out Second Coming, Salem's Lot, The Shining, The Stand, and The Dead Zone. I'm not sure about Second Coming, but the rest of those have all been adapted multiple times for film and TV.
Yeah, I recognize some of those.
Yeah, right? Like, I mean, The Dead Zone is a great movie with Christopher Walken, and then a TV show starring Anthony Michael Hall.
Yeah, that's
in
what
like
I thought
the
it was.
2000s.
Okay, when you said the Christopher Walken, I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it's a TV show on like TNT or something.
Right, yeah. It was a show that was always on.
Always
for a period
on.
Of time.
Yeah.
Just perpetual marathons all through our high school years. Yeah.
Basically SVU, but with less episodes.
Exactly that. It's probably fairly close, it felt like. It was just on so often. But the movie is actually fantastic, and I highly recommend it. And it's not really scary. It's not like horror. But obviously The Shining, the Kubrick movie in the 70s, or maybe 1980. And then miniseries with Steven Weber in the 90s. You've got like The Stand, which has been made into miniseries multiple times. Like all of these things, they just keep coming out with them. The thing about Stephen King movies, not just like, oh, his stuff gets adapted. It's like, no, it gets adapted over and over and over again. The thing is, and he leaves this out of his website bio, but he's very candid about it elsewhere. He was also drinking unfathomable amounts of alcohol and doing just so many drugs during this period of time.
Oh, well, we've answered the question. That's how we found the time.
Yeah,
he wasn't
this is
sleeping.
how he found the time. And yes, in fact, if you have any sense of The Shining at all, it's about a rage-filled alcoholic writer, and is a not so thinly veiled reference to himself. An unfortunate thing for King was that he dealt with rejection by getting wasted, but then he started getting published while he was off his tits. And we all know how artsy types can then tend to be like, oh, it's because I'm like better when I'm drinking.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, I'm better when I'm using a shit ton of Coke. So he stayed on the sauce as it dragged him down, causing his wife to, on at least one occasion, and I think more than that, kick him out of the house. Yeah. And he said that he straight up doesn't even remember writing his early books like Carrie because he was so completely wasted the entire time that he was writing it. Right. And in the 80s, he got into a cool little cycle of drinking so much that, of course, it'd make him tired. So he'd take cocaine to stay awake, abusing the drug to the point where he was getting frequent nosebleeds just from constantly snorting it all the time. He finally gave it all up. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, is that when he wrote this book?
I'm actually not, I think it might have been actually, now that I think about it. I have to look at what year the book came out. But in 1989, he finally gave it all up, and he's been sober for the past 35 years. Which seems to be working out pretty well for him. He's still reading and writing a shit ton of books. In fact, it's kind of a bookish inside joke that Stephen King will blurb absolutely anything. He really likes reading, and he's super supportive of other authors. So like if you see a blurb from Stephen King on a book, like you can't really trust it.
Yeah.
Because he just likes everything.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, oh, Stephen King said that this is a nonstop thrill ride that'll seep into your veins and keep you up at night. And it's just like the dumbest thing you've ever read. Just like, Aw, Steve, you're a nice
Steve.
guy.
He just wants his friends to do well, man.
Exactly. Just
And
good
sometimes
guy
his friends
Steve.
are total strangers.
Exactly. Just, I appreciate that in an artist, that they just want like other artists to succeed,
Yeah.
especially like, I think I think this is more of an old school mentality, but a lot of in the old days people were like, almost hazing younger artists and feeling like, well, I had to earn it. So you should have to work just as hard and go through as much hardship. And I feel like, I just really respect authors and artists and musicians and all that kind of stuff that are like, no, let me pull you up with me. Like there's room for all of us up here,
Yeah.
So now, like I said, we all know that Uncle Steve is a lifelong Maina. And this has become hugely central to all his books. Not just in that they are set there, but in that they all actually belong in the same little literary and cinematic universe. And I actually remember when I realized this for the first time. I was reading the Tommyknockers, and a character from another one of his books that I had like just read was referenced in it. And I was like, hang on.
Wait a minute.
Is this connected? What's going on here? But it's not so direct that it's like, oh, you need to read this book to understand this book. It's just that, if something takes place at the same time in the same location, of course someone's going to know somebody who was in this other book.
Yeah.
It just makes sense, right? So a site called Fiction File lays out the setting connections first and foremost. King's main locations are the fictional towns of Derry and Castle Rock. And Derry is obviously where it takes place. But other stories set there include 11/22/63, Dreamcatcher, Gerald's Game, Hearts Atlantis, Misery, Pet Cemetery, The Running Man, Tommyknockers, and Under the Dome.
Wait, those all take place under the
dome?
And
that's not even, yes.
The dome from Ben's homework assignment?
I don't think that's the same dome. But that was a good attempt.
Explained the dome to me. I got a lot of airtime for something that didn't have anything to do with anything.
I think that it's just like the center of town, but it also may come back around in the second one because there's more like town-based stuff. But it's been a minute since I watched it. I'm thinking of watching it after this, since I know I'm never going to get you to watch it. But anyways, that's just a few of the books that take place there. I am giving you a super abridged list. There's like 2 or 3 times that. And then let's see. So those were in Derry. And then Castle Rock also shows up in 11/22/63, It and Dreamcatcher, as well as The Body, the movie version of which is Stand By Me, Creepshow, Cujo, The Dead Zone, Dr. Sleep, Sleepwalkers, The Stand, and so on. Like I said, I'm leaving out a ton of books here, but you get the idea. Shared location, and like I said, as such, it's, kind of like how in Tana French's Dublin Murder Squad books, there's always going to have some side character from the book before, right?
Tana French, my nemesis.
Your nemesis, Tana French. But you get the idea. Someday
when I meet her, I'm going to say, your book made me the angriest I've ever been. You know what? She'll probably be proud of that.
Yeah, probably. You probably wouldn't be the first person to say so. But the overarching theme of King's multiverse is an idea called Ka, K-A, which comes from the Dark Tower series. Now, I have never read these books, but many people I know absolutely eat, sleep, and breathe them. Mark actually is one of the biggest Stephen King fans I know. He's actually actively makes sure to read all of his books when they come out, and Stephen King puts out a lot of very long books. I probably get to every third Stephen King book. Our pal Jojo loves Dark Tower. It's their fave thing ever. Also, I think It is actually Jojo's favorite book of all time, but Dark Tower is hugely important to them. So I've never read them though, but arguably if you're a true King fan or what he calls a constant reader, you really have to read the Dark Tower books to fully understand it all. But Ka is basically destiny, and a Ka-tet is a group of people linked together by Caw to work towards a common goal. And the central villain, or one of the central villains in this multiverse, is a guy called Randall Flagg, who first appears in The Stand, but is most significantly the antagonist of the Dark Tower series. And don't worry about remembering all this. I'm just giving you the overview of what all this is.
Okay.
But that's also not the only place he shows up. He appears in other books by other names, like The Walking Dude, The Hard Case, Dark Man, and The Man in Black, amongst others. Now, as a fantasy fan, Kristin, you'll appreciate that the overarching threads of the King Macroverse are grounded firmly in fantasy more than they are horror.
Mm.
And the characters within his books can sort of pass between realms. Readers call these realms the territories, and the characters who can cross these boundaries, twinners. And this basically means that readers theorize that some characters are actually alternate universe versions of each other, like Annie Wilkes from Misery and Dolores Claiborne. They'd say these are the same character in different universes.
Sorry,
There's also
Dolores Claiborne. What's she in?
Dolores Claiborne is the name of the book/movie.
Oh.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
You told me their name in the other book. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Dolores Claiborne from Dolores Claiborne.
From Dolores Claiborne. Thank you. Forget who you're talking to here.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I apologize. There's also just more mundane surface level connections that feel more like Easter eggs than deep, meaningful plot points. For example, there's a pharmacy that comes up in tons of the books. There's a recurring magazine called Inside View that shows up multiple times. And there's even an author in the books who writes a series called The Dark Wanderer, much like The Dark Tower, in which the protagonist has the same initials, RD, as the main character in the Dark Tower books. So there's even like a Stephen King within the Stephen King macro universe. There's actually on the fiction file page, they have this graphic of connections. And I guess like someone on Etsy sells this web of connections of like all of the ways in which everything is intertwined with each other. And it's like so small and like intricate that like you literally cannot blow it up enough to see it. You would have to order it and put it on like a wall or whatever to be able to tell like what all the details are on this. It's like just that convoluted. And largely like it's readers who have uncovered all of these things. He's sticking that stuff in there and they're kind of pulling that all out themselves without much commentary from him on any of this. And to bring it back around to it, your friend and mine, Pennywise the Clown, is referenced in...
Just want that to be clear.
Not even as a joke. Pennywise is not my friend.
No, it's not my friend. I don't want that rumor getting started.
We'll stop that right here. Our enemy, Pennywise the Clown, is referenced in graffiti reading Pennywise Lives in Dreamcatcher, which stars, what's his face? Brienne's favorite ginger with the tiny mouth from Band of Brothers.
Damian Lewis?
Yes, Damian Lewis. Yeah. So let's get down to Pennywise here.
Okay.
All right. Just to, as an entree into what the fuck you were dealing with in this movie. Like I said, King is big into fantasy. And a lot of his macroverse is dependent on sort of unknowable, ancient, Cthulhu-esque eldritch horrors that are beyond our ability to comprehend. Pennywise is one of the prime examples of this. One of your questions was he a human? No, absolutely was not. To us, he manifests as a clown, which Stephen King picked pretty much because clowns were the scariest thing that he could think of. He was like, what are kids scared of? Oh, I know, fucking clowns.
Yeah.
And if you weren't before, well, he made damn sure you were after. But Pennywise isn't actually a clown. That's just how we comprehend him as sort of an embodiment of fear. That's why he also takes the form of other things that the kids are afraid of throughout this. He just kind of can take on what scares you the most. But he's actually something much older than our universe. And in a sort of macabre Monsters, Inc. situation, fear just makes people taste way better. As Collider puts it, quote, "This is why he prefers to feast on children. Their fears are simple, pure, and powerful compared to the complex pathological fears of adults."
Mm.
And they're not pulling this out of their ass. This is from the book. So there's like stuff that's obviously a little lost because the book is literally like 1,200 pages. And so, a 2-hour movie or even 4 hours of movie is not going to be able to broach the like deep lore that's involved in this. But that's the idea. They go after the kids because they taste better, because their fear is purer than the adults. And the kids of Derry, with their horrendous tragedies and traumatic family lives and shit adult figures, are tasty as fuck. So every 27 years, he comes back around and has a nice meal before going back into her hibernation like some sort of ancient murderous cicada. So Collider also explains that beyond Pennywise's physical forms are these destructive orange lights that drive most humans insane if they see them. This is what Beverly sees in the movie that causes her to go catatonic and floaty. It also has an effect on her that we don't see manifested fully until chapter 2. But what we do see here is her instantly, as soon as she sees those lights, when he reveals himself to her, her eyes go and she drifts. Now, there's more lore here with like a giant turtle that belched up the universe and whatnot, but I don't think we need to delve into that. I think you know enough now about what you just watched that we can get your experience of watching the movie and sort of answer your questions as we go along. Probably all you need to know for now.
Great.
So, Kristin,
Yeah.
as always, let's dive in with your experience of watching this movie.
0 stars. It was too scary. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't have fun. This movie was like, not only was it scary, which it was,
it is,
but
yes.
it was just so bleak. Like, there was hardly anyone to root for. I like barely rooted for these kids even. I was like, I guess, like, I mean, I did, but it just was like, there was nothing like, I don't know. I just didn't find it, like, it was so scary and sad and terrible and everyone was awful that it was like not even entertaining. I'm like, this is just like depressing almost, like in its sadness and scariness. And these kids are just like abandoned, right, to their like these awful lives that they had. And so it just, oh god, yeah. And then it just was terrible. I hated the bullies. They were like, like there was something about like the water in the town, right? Because it was like or the big monster alien like, clown, psychotic, like like carving your name into a child's stomach is not something any normal bully, right? Like that's like next level. Like, I don't know. I feel like this is one of those things that I always find interesting when I watch like a lot of stuff. I think there's something to our coastal eliteness that like precludes us from understanding like just how bad people are in some areas. And like I know that there are people that I know and who talk about stuff like this on like Blue Sky and stuff like that, because I know a lot of like queer people on there and things like that who like had horrific violence done to them by bullies. This never like happened like that in my school. But can we then still agree that that is like next level? Like that is not normal behavior. Like just because it's happened to a lot of people doesn't make it normal or good or right. So no, absolutely not. Like, I think bully is like carving his name into it, right? And that like all of the bullies are like that, and it just was like, and then the every adult that you met was trash. There was not one adult who you were like, this guy's got your, the only adult that maybe felt like was cool was the like sad mom, because at least she cared about her child who was missing. Sure, yeah. Right? Like the dad yells at Bill because he like is like worried about his brother, and like instead of like talking him through that, he just like yells at him for like being sad about his brother. And I was like, what is wrong with you, right? And then like what's his face's mom was, what's the crazy mom from that made her girl get sick? Oh yeah, Gypsy Rose. Gypsy Rose's mom. Yeah, there's that lady. Like even Grandpa was like, this kid's like struggling, like killing the sheep, and he's like, get it together, the world's fucking terrible. And you're like, "Jeez, Grandpa, like, can't just anyone show a little bit of like empathy to anybody in this like whole movie?" And so it was just like rough to watch these kids like go through their lives like this, and then to like also then be terrorized by this like very scary clown. Like, it wasn't even just like a clown and then like his face would get scary, which he did, but it also just like whenever he was just being regular clown face was also the worst thing I'd ever
It's
seen.
like his like lower lip is too wet. And like,
and he's like always drooling, which is weird.
He's always drooling. Yeah,
and I didn't love that. And then like there was this thing about like, so the very beginning when Georgie goes down to get the wax from the basement, which I'm like, why any of this? Fine, but he like goes down, doesn't turn a light on, has a flashlight, doesn't use it, and I'm like, okay. And like it's that point where you're like already waiting for the darkness to stare back at you, you know?
Right, yeah.
But then at multiple points in this movie, like the darkness literally stared back at them.
Yeah, actually.
Like it actually did. And I was like, oh my God. And so that was why I had to turn the light on, because I was like, I can't turn the light off. The second I turn the light off, all I see
the dark
are
looks
eyes.
At me.
It just looks at me all of the time. And so it was just terrible. And so I just felt like every time something happened, my whole body was like tense the whole time. Yeah. And just like watching like this. My roommate actually came home at one point, and I don't know exactly what my face was doing, but she goes, "What's up with your face? Because I must have been doing something like," and it was like
recoiling.
I was like holding it because it was like I was doing it, and she came in, and I like barely even noticed she was there, and I still did it, and she was like, "What is like, watching?
It's been long enough. You should have changed your face by now.
Your face doesn't need to be like that, you know." And I don't even remember what part of the movie it was, but I was like, I felt like that multiple times, where I was like, why? Why though? Why?
I think this is like, it's very peak Stephen King, because he deals in a lot of that, like the really bleak elements of growing up, right? Like he loves to write about kids. As he's gotten older, that's become more and more absurd, because now all his kids talk like boomers in his books, and you're like, why do they talk like 75-year-old men? But he loves to write about kids and sort of loss of innocence and growing up, and the harder parts of that. And I always think, looking back on like the 80s and 90s, and certainly for like a boomer, these people who grew up in the wake of like their parents coming back from World War II, which his did, his father served in World War II, and they were raised often in like very distant homes where like moms were drinking and taking Valium and all that kind of stuff to get through their day, and dads were traumatized from the war and abusive and all of this kind of stuff, moving into boomer parents that sort of inflicted a lot of that trauma onto their kids or ignored them. There's a reason for all those like Gen X memes about like not coming home till the street lights came on and the drinking out of the hose and shit like that. Like what they're really talking about is neglect. That like 80s and 90s parents neglected their children most of the time, and I think that he really deals with a lot of that whether these were people who returned from World War II, whether these are boomer parents traumatized by how their parents raised them, things like that. As you're growing up as a kid, you're trying to work with this really like just fucked up world that they are leaving to you, which I like to think now is not really the case. I mean, the world is terrible, but I feel like millennial parents are not. They're largely pretty attentive to their children and stuff like that. But he's really dealing in like these sort of growing up was a painful thing, because suddenly you're faced with the harsh realities of like that your parents either can't or won't protect you, and he represents that through this like, okay, there's this this otherworldly being hiding under the town that's also impacting that, right? So like one of the questions that you asked about, like I think it was a mix of like two questions that you asked about both like why Henry killed his dad, and also like why are the parents so oblivious?
Well, it was why did because he's terrorizing all these kids. Who Henry, you find, is like also a very scared child, like his
extremely,
father,
yeah,
right? Like he is petrified, and so it was interesting to me that he's like spending. It's like probably the most scared kid out of all of these kids. He's like, I'm not going to eat that kid. I'm gonna have him kill his dad.
I'm
what?
gonna
like it just felt like further. If anybody was going to taste good, it was going to be that fucking kid.
Yeah, like, this kid for sure.
You know what I mean? So there was this, and then obviously, but there was, you heard it in that creepy kids show that was playing in the background, like whenever someone was doing something kind of shitty. Yeah, and I had this feeling where I'm like, it feels like, is everybody in this town terrible, or does this clown just make everybody terrible?
Yeah, and I think it's like a mix of both those things. Like he's commenting on what adults were like and kind of have been like when it comes to like passing trauma down on their children in various ways and then ignoring the effects of what they did to them. But also, you know, story-wise, the presence of this dark it under the town is always sort of casting its influence and its darkness over everyone to the point of being able to manipulate them into things like him going and killing his dad, or even like one of the things that he does is it's inaction. So we see that in the way that parents like kind of ignore their kids' needs and all of these kinds of things, but like more straightforward is like when poor Ben is getting his stomach all carved up, the like old couple just drives by and like looks and doesn't do anything about it.
I was like, what's wrong with literally everyone in this town? Yeah,
it's like this thing is also causing inaction in everyone.
It also causes, I think, and I wrote this down too when I was watching, like an unbelievable amount of curiosity in these children. Like they know there's a killer clown on the loose.
Right.
He's terrorizing them. Bev is at home in the bathroom. She hears voices in the sink.
And she goes for it.
Not have paid me enough money to be like, I'm going to investigate that. Like, I'd be like, oh, I guess I'm moving. I'm leaving the bathroom and I'm never taking a shower again. Where she's like, no, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to, not only am I going to look into it closely, I'm going to go get something and stick it down. I'm like, none of that. You're doing none of that.
None of those things, absolutely not.
And then it's like multiple times when they're like, "Oh, yeah, I'm gonna go check that out." I'm like Ben, when he's like, really, literally reads about this terrible thing, sees a floating balloon that nobody else seems to notice, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna follow that." And I'm like, "You are?
Let's just see where this goes."
He just read about this explosion around Easter, and then he finds like a smoking like Easter egg, and he's like, "That seems cool." And then goes into this dark basement, and I'm like, "Look, man, I don't want to victim blame, but." You stop investigating.
You gotta use your head.
We gotta be smart. And I mean, it's interesting to me because it's like, on one hand, right, they investigate things and I'm like, do not investigate. Do not go into this dark thing and look at that noise. We don't need to do that. But on the other hand, they're like, we're gonna kill this clown. But they do no homework to figure out that. They're like, at one point, Bev had stuck a poker through his head and he did not die. And yet they're like, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna go kill this clown. And at the end, we're like, totally got him. I was like, in what world are you living? Do you think you killed him? You don't even know what he is. None of us seem to, because no one has explained that to me, right?
Right.
So you don't know anything about him. He's floating children in the air, and you think that like you kind of just like
he
batted him around a bit, and then he like jumped back into his like sleepy hole. I'm like, what is wrong with like
he's coming back?
Like, right? He's like definitely coming back. And so it was just like wild to me, like the things that they did investigate. And then they tried to make Ben into this like big skull. Oh, I do this homework on this town. I was like, well, Ben, out of everybody, do some fucking reading, bud. Go pick out the book that's like in the restricted section of the library that's made with human skin.
The thing about it, though, and since you're not going to watch the second one, is that people immediately forget this is part of his impact. So there's not going to be any books explaining this. No one has ever written down what's happened with it. So
is that why they think, well, then how did they make the connection between
go ahead. Between
the 27 years, because they never mention a bunch of kids go missing.
They do. Yeah.
But they don't when they're talking about it.
They do. Ben goes through and he names all of the 27-year things in here. And that was one of your questions, was what's the black spot? It was a nightclub that was torched by a hate group in the 60s. He mentions that in his list of...
He does?
Yeah. It's
like I missed that completely.
It was a black jazz club in the 60s, a hate group burned it down. He goes through all those things, and then he says that people go missing in Derry at 6 times the normal rate of everywhere else, and that's just adults. The children are even worse. So over the years, the kids have been disappearing.
Not every 27 years, though.
Every 27 years, yeah.
But I guess he just says the normal rate. So it's like, you're not. No one was linking those disappearances to like an explosion at a nightclub, an explosion at a factory. Like, okay, like. Right. Those seem like two sort of very and those weren't even those were like even longer than 27 years, right? Because it was like the 60s and the 20s or whatever that when it started.
Yeah, he has their like missing and 27-year blocks between the and big
he
events.
Out, yeah, but he's like, oh, these big events. I'm like, but even the big events are unrelated. It's not like every 27 years something lights on fire. I mean, and this time nothing lit on fire. So what's going to be the big event that they? Circle around this time, and no one's going to remember these kids went missing, and there's going to be like, well, I guess nothing happened that one time, so maybe it's not every 27, so just anyway, I was like,
I mean, that's exactly it, is that there's no reason for anyone to, because of that influence of Pennywise on the town, once these events pass, they just forget about them. And so in chapter 2, even the Losers Club has forgotten that this ever happened.
That's not a surprise or a spoiler, because that's very obvious. Because they're like, okay, we're taking a blood oath. I'm like, literally every adult in your town could not be more oblivious.
They have no idea.
You think that you're going to grow up and be different? No. I'm sure what will happen is that either like, well, I'm assuming you'll have to come back at some point, because I'm assuming most of you or all of you are leaving. Something will bring you back, and you guys will all be like, no, you guys, we took care of that. Or, oh, that was just a silly thing we did. And you're like, you're going to just be like, start it all over.
Yeah, basically. They all come back and have to sort of figure out what happened, what's going on, and all of this kind of stuff. Which sort of, it's spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen the second one, which I imagine probably everyone has. Give me 15 seconds to spoil a part of the second one, but I think they come back because Stanley kills himself. And so they coming
left
back.
Stanley alone in Derry? Those assholes.
I don't think he was in Derry. I think the only one who stays in Derry is
why do they come back to
Mike.
Derry?
Well, his family's from there. So I think they come back for like the funeral with his family.
Oh, his family stayed in Derry.
Yeah. He left.
Poor Stanley, long-suffering Stanley. Like, also, I just do not think they had to wrap his head in such a goofy way. At the end, like, surely there was another way we could have done that. Like, the hair here, you know what I mean? It was, like, so goofy.
Sometimes I just feel like a lot of choices were made on that set because the kids were so cute that, like, the costume designers and things were like, this is just really adorable.
Oh, my gosh. I know. Little fanny pack.
They are very cute.
Hypochondriac kid was so cute.
Adorable.
Oh, my God. I was obsessed with him.
It's just so precious.
I loved him so much.
I believe you said in your notes that you think that you're him.
Yeah, because I'm like not into, right? He's like, I'm not getting into this dirty tunnel. Like, you know, like he's like, we're supposed to be having fun. I'm like, yeah. What are we doing here, kids?
Yeah, definitely.
But, oh my God, I know. I did love Little Hit, and I did like Richie. He was so funny, and I also was confused. Was it because he was like so? He was scared of clowns already, so I feel like it would have been a real easy. He was a real layup for.
Again, this is one of those. It's explained in the second movie thing that his fear is not really clowns. In the book, he actually did have like a fear of werewolves, and I think in the miniseries as well. But the director basically sort of decided to forego that whole thing in order to have more of an emotional reveal in the second movie, where he's gay. And so he, like, his real fear has to do with, like, the, coming out and his feelings as a gay kid. So that's why he, like, when they ask him, like, what are you afraid of? He's like, clowns. So he doesn't want to say what he's actually fearing.
But he hadn't seen anything.
Right. And that's intentional because the director didn't want to reveal that until the second movie. So if he had, what was he going to see? That would be like, that wouldn't give away that he's gay.
Well, no, I mean, I guess honestly, I'm not kidding you. Remember how I didn't even notice that they weren't showing Freddie Prinze Jr.'s like having run-ins with the hook man?
Yeah.
I honestly don't know if I would have. There were so many children.
Right.
There's so many kids. I'm like, I honestly am not sure if I would have even noticed.
Yeah, if they hadn't called it out.
And then I was like, oh yeah. Did you just run? I honestly thought was like, oh, they must have just run out of time because this movie's fucking long. How much longer is this movie going to go on for?
Right.
So I honestly was like, I bet they cut it for time.
Yeah, whatever his was, they just didn't use it.
Whatever it was. Like, I thought he was doing it as honestly was doing it as a joke. Like, oh yeah, I'm scared of clowns. And you're like, oh man, well, you're really about to get shit on.
Yeah, this is going to be...
Because he's like such a smart ass the whole movie, you know?
Yeah, totally. No, I think the idea behind it was to intentionally sort of draw attention to the fact that we hadn't seen what he was scared of. So that then when it's revealed in chapter 2, you're like, okay, got it. Yep, I see what happened here. Where he is played wonderfully by Bill Hader. I'm a total chapter 2 apologist. A lot of people hate chapter 2. And I absolutely love it. And I like the adults who are in it and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, you can't go wrong with a little Hader in your life.
I mean, you can't.
You can't.
Not enough.
Obviously, you're not going to watch it. So yeah, it's maybe a little clunky leaving out his, what his fear is in the first one, but it makes sort of serving the second movie.
And it makes more sense if the book is 1,200 pages long. Like,
right. You have
also
a
makes
more
sense.
room.
But it almost is like, at that point, I'm like, well, you got to do something then, because now you're making me like it's almost like I spent the whole movie being like, so. And then it was kind of hard to get to the end, but like, this whole movie is set up for another movie. I'm like, okay, well then this was all a waste of my time because I'm not going to watch that either.
Yeah, I think, they assume that you plan to watch the second one. They're not. They didn't really make the movie around person who hates horror movies watching it for a podcast.
They should never assume. They could have assumed that it was so scary that people would not watch the second one.
That's a valid
Surely
point.
That happened to more than just me.
Yeah, you're probably not the only one on the planet who had this experience.
Be the only one who saw the first one and was like, I can't emotionally handle the second one. Right?
No, I would imagine you are not alone in that.
I'm not. I like to just say that I'm not. Let's just say that's true.
Mm-hmm.
You heard it here, folks. If you were
so
scared,
many people,
if you were so scared by It Chapter 1 that you couldn't watch It Chapter 2, you're not alone. Call this number at the bottom of your screen, and you too might be entitled to compensation.
The angel.
If you have mesothelioma, and
we'll fight for you.
We'll fight for you.
Rest in peace, Larry H. Parker.
Yeah. Oh, he didn't do mesothelioma either. He did.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? No, he did mesothelioma. Mesothelioma? That was too many syllables.
I don't think he really. No, he did like accidents.
No, stop it. I have to Google this now. I am almost certain he did mesothelioma.
The only mesothelioma commercials I remember never really had people, just like a lot of text scrolling on the screen.
I guess maybe he was a personal injury attorney. Yeah, I guess maybe it was that. Fair enough.
I know.
Who did? Yeah. Now, like, so was there no person for the mesothelioma?
No, it was just literally like white screen, blue writing.
Yeah, you're right.
Had it, and then it's like, look at all these symptoms you could have, and you're like, oh god, do I have it?
Okay.
By the end, I'm like fucking Eddie's mom. I'm like, I probably have mesothelioma.
Definitely have mesothelioma.
Yeah, but I was glad that they came around to save Bev at the end because I honestly wasn't sure they were gonna.
Right. Well, that's the thing is it really does keep you in a spot where you don't know.
Yeah, they very quickly were like, I'm outie, right? Like, this is more than I bargained for. I'm like, oh, really? Taking on a murderous clown was more than you bargained for? No shit,
Didn't think
Sherlock.
This was going to happen?
Didn't think this... Yeah, it was, like, wild. And so then when they were like, okay, we'll go get Bev, I'm like, all right. But I honestly wonder if it had been Bill, if they would have been like, meh.
Right, it's like, we all just, like, really like her, and so... we just,
like, really like Bev. Oh, and Bev was just so sad.
God, her life was sad. It's extremely sad, yeah.
It was, and she just got kissed without her consent much too many times.
Just all the time. All the time. I was like,
look, that's not how that works. I did
this enjoy is not what we do.
Yeah, I did like how when Ben kissed her to, like, wake her up or whatever, Mike was like, even Mike, homeschool Mike.
Yeah, who's like, I don't think you
like,
do that.
Even I know you don't do that. You know, even my grandpa who makes me kill sheep, even he told me that's bad.
That's not how you treat a lady.
Yeah.
But I mean, Ben is just so adorable. He's probably my. I feel like if there's
He
a
loves
character
New
that
Kids
I
on
am
the
in it.
Block.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm Ben in this. The nerdy, like, oh, I've researched all the history here, and then I'm listening to New Kids on the Block and writing an unrequited love letter to somebody. Like, that's me.
I was actually proud, because I was like, don't send that postcard, Ben. Like, don't do it. And then he put it in her backpack. I was like, oh, Ben, you did it.
Oh, no. And then you're like, oh, wait. But she needed that. She needed that little bit of love that he gave to her.
Sweet,
just so precious. Just
Right.
precious. And then he was in the Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I know.
Series.
When he showed up, I was like, I know that. I mean, I knew these kids from everything. Right?
Well, right. Yeah, they're all over the place. Very famous children.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Are You Afraid of the Dark is more my speed.
Right. Yes.
They're talking scary. I was like, oh, Ben, I mean, look, if I were to meet him, I'd be like, oh, man, loved you in Are You Afraid of the Dark? Right? Everyone's like, oh, my God, you were Ben from it. I'm like, oh, my gosh, you were in Are You Afraid of the Dark? And
what was it like working with Rafa?
Tell me everything. Is he charming in real life?
It'd be the Jacob Pitts thing all over again. It's like, no one has ever asked me any of these questions. Who are you people?
Girlfriend or his fiance was like, oh, that's usually not what people
That's
know.
not what people recognize him from.
For those of you who don't know Jacob Pitts, he was very famously in Justified, many seasons of Justified, but he was also in the Pacific.
Yes.
And me and Corey obviously love the Pacific, and we saw him at a play, and he was in there. We're like, okay, we got to go talk to him. And so we're talking to him, and we're like, when we love the Pacific, we're like, ask him all these
he
questions.
could tell we were coming too. Like he's like bracing himself, like, here it comes,
Here
the
it comes.
Justified
It's like,
fans.
the Justified thing, and we're like, so can you tell us everything about the Pacific? And his girlfriend, who was like taking her picture, even was like
they were so taken aback.
Was so surprised. Like physically, they both backed up and were like, "I'm sorry, what do you want to talk about?" And then he had no answers for us because he's like, "I haven't thought about that." And
he was like, this is not a question I'm ever asked. Not a thing I've thought about in several years.
Oh my God! And I was like, "Well, you should think about it more."
Like, weird, because we think about it a lot.
I think about it all of the time.
Quite often, regularly.
It's my Roman Empire,
right? So yes, this would be us but poor Ben here. But I mean, that's the thing with something like Are You Afraid of the Dark, though, is like it is really kind of Stephen King light. It's doing the same kinds of things. I mean, that is
it's prepping those kids who really like children. I watched it, obviously. I mean, we watched that one as an adult because it was the remake. But the children who watch that are like little yous.
Exactly. The ones who grow up to be like psyched on this shit. But like especially the premise of the reboot of Are You Afraid of the Dark, with like the disappearance of kids at a circus with some sort of, ethereal circus master or whatever.
Like it's so all hot though.
Like very hot, very charismatic.
Look at that hair.
Yeah, if that's what Pennywise looked like, but he wouldn't be getting a lot of fear.
Let me float around. That was also weird to me too, because I was like, I have a lot of questions about the floating children. What happens when he goes to sleep? And then they all like came down. And I was like, well, what happened to the bodies? Did they do something with the bodies?
I think they probably just decomposed in that sewer would be my guess.
The kids just left him there and we're like, we're not going to tell anybody about this. What about that mom who was still waiting at school for her daughter? I'm like traumatized by her experience.
It's very sad, just standing there outside the school. Like, surely she's going to come outside. God.
And the cops even were like, oh, lady.
Oh, yeah, this is getting sad, ma'am.
Unhealthy, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think in that case, it's, nobody, because they're all, like, in that house that no one goes near anyway. So I just assume everybody just decomposes. From your nightmares. Yeah, it's like straight Monster House.
Like, if that house was in my neighborhood, there's just no lengths to which I would not go to walk around it so I wouldn't be in its vicinity.
And then like Pennywise and his weird shapeshifting, like even though what's his face doesn't even go in, the like leper chases him around anyway. I feel like that's one of the most disturbing parts of it to me, is that it's just like obviously Pennywise can be anywhere, but it's like that feeling of like I'm safe because I'm outside of the place where the scary things happen, and then the scary thing chases you anyway. It's
and
like, that's against the rule.
And it's broad daylight.
It's broad daylight. Twilight. Like, you're breaking all of the rules. You're not allowed to do that.
And he didn't even investigate a voice in his sink.
Yeah, right.
He was doing everything right.
He was just trying to walk by, and there was nothing he could do. Oh man, it's terrifying. Another one of your questions here, by the way. Why do I know Seth Grahame-Smith? Which you put
I wrote investigate. Oh, I forgot to investigate. No, who was it?
He wrote. Yeah, he wrote Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. It's like, Seth Grahame-Smith.
I like saw that name and I was like, and I even in my head was like, it's an author. He's written something. I was like, but because it was in obviously Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is very different. Oh, Seth Grahame-Smith.
There you go. Also, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, but we have not watched that nearly as much as Pride and Prejudice.
I forgot to investigate that later.
Yep. So happy to
revisit
fill that in for you. I don't know why.
Well,
Very weird.
I'm trying not to think about this movie. I'm glad we're recording, so I can literally never think about it again.
Yeah, exactly. Did we have other questions that we have not answered yet? This is not the questions list, but your reactions list, which of course we will post. So look in the description as well, or the blog post on Ko-Fi. But it has a lot of caps, many exclamation and question marks, like so many question marks.
So many question marks.
So many caps. It's delightful. But were there other things before we get into your monthly checklist that you wanted to address?
No, that's okay. I just want to say that again, I did not enjoy this experience.
In case that's not clear,
I have enjoyed the other movies. Like there's been right, even though like Strangers was very scary. Yeah, I still
you had a good time with it.
Had a good time with it in a way, in its own way. I enjoy like The Conjuring. Right, I mean, honestly, if it hadn't been
Patrick Wilson.
I don't know if I would have liked it.
Right.
I did. And Nixon
really goes a long way.
Right. So, and I felt like there was something there. There's something. This had, like I said, that bleakness made it even harder. And I just.
Yeah. This is fascinating. And I love this journey because it's kind of the figuring out why. Like what works for you and what doesn't, and why some things are just the wrong kind of horror for you.
Yeah.
And so we have uncovered a thing here where I fucking love bleak horror. Like some of my favorite horror is Australian, and Australians are the bleakest human beings on the planet. There is not a hint of joy or hope in anything in those. But we have discovered that is not fun for you. You
I don't like bleak things in general. I feel like the world feels bleak most of the time. But I'd like a little levity, a little sunshine, a little something to get me through to the end. But I also think this one being so rooted in a fear I've had of storm.
Doesn't help.
Doesn't help. The bleakness doesn't help it.
No, because it's like it could have. I was just gonna say it could have been like a cathartic thing if it played out differently, where you got to revisit it and then you're like, that wasn't as bad as I thought.
Totally, but
and instead
I literally think of Chucky, right? Where I was like, oh, that wasn't as bad. This was actually I had a good time, right? It was some of it was a little goofy, where this was like, oh, this was just as bad, maybe even worse somehow. And I am still unable to confront this fear because now it is still scary. Like, it didn't get any better. Yeah.
So I think we've learned something this month that is valuable on this journey. Bleak.
I don't know if I want to give you any more insight into my psyche. You already used it against me once.
That's not what I meant to do. It was just simply I felt like there was some little part of you in there that had it's the push pull, the attraction repulsion, the I don't want to watch this, but at the same time my brain can't stop bringing it up, and I thought maybe that ripping the Band-Aid off would work. It didn't.
It
did not. So shall we break it down then?
Yeah, let's break it down.
I think it's probably going to be clear what your answer to this is, but poster versus movie, which is scarier.
Yeah, shockingly, the fucking movie was scarier. But the poster kind of lives into that fear of like the darkness looking back at you because the clown's very obscured in the darkness and then by the balloon.
Yeah.
In a way that I didn't like.
It's like already
eyes were very scary to me. He had very scary eyes.
He does.
Which I know is probably
Bill Skarsgård has scary eyes too.
Right.
So it's like really it's layers.
Scary enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Very much so. I was reading something, I think it was an interview with Andy Muschietti, the director. And like one of the things it was talking about like was the mini series of it. Like Pennywise is creepy because clowns are creepy, but he does just like look and act like a circus clown, right? Like he's not especially scary except in context. Otherwise, this would just be any guy at Ringling Brothers or whatever, right? But this Pennywise leans into that this is not human, that this is not just some guy in clown makeup. Like he is, even in his default clown face, he's not human. It's horrifying to look at him at any point.
And it's also the way he moves.
The way he speaks, like everything.
Yeah, and I would say honestly one of the scariest parts was when they're sitting in the kitchen, right, and they're trying to help Eddie's broken his arm.
Yeah.
And he is like in a refrigerator, or no, he's like coming out from a dark hallway and you just see his hand and he does like one of these things with the hand on the wall. And I was like, I don't like that particular, like he's done a lot of that's like pretty far into the movie and he's done a lot of things that were unsettling, but that to me was like deeply unsettling in a way that I've thought about it multiple times since.
Yeah.
And I'm probably going to think about it tonight.
Yeah, now that you've brought it back up again. So that's fun. Yeah, he moves in truly horrifying ways. I think Bill Skarsgård was a very good choice for this because he's
so tall.
He's too long in real life.
His limbs are too long.
Limbs are wrong. There's too much of him, and it plays out perfectly in the bizarre ways in which this demon clown moves. So biggest jump scare in the flick.
Yeah, this was hard to choose. So
yeah, there's quite a few of them.
There's quite a few times when I've jumped really bad, but I think the one that got me that like I feel like for the most part I was expecting them, like,
right?
Because literally any point in this movie I was like, this will be a jump scare, and then it wasn't. I was like, this will be a jump scare. But it was when Bev's dad comes into the bathroom and you're like, this is they surely cannot let this happen, right? So when she knocks him out and you're like, oh, so then you breathe a sigh of relief. It was like her
she won
in the shower, like, okay, phew, we got it. And then her turning around and him being there, I was like, no, I thought we were like mellowing for a second.
Right, we had
you were
one
amped,
victory. Yeah, right, exactly. It's a terrifying moment, and you're like, that is one of when we talked, last time about the idea of unearned jump scares or whatever. Like that is like the pinnacle of an earned jump scare right there, because it really that's not something you're used to seeing. It takes advantage of your understanding of how movies work. It takes advantage of the fact that what should happen is we just saw the scary thing just finished.
Yeah.
Ooh, take a breather, and instead you don't even get a moment.
Yeah.
Bam,
I
there he
honestly
is.
am trying to remember if I could even scream because I think I was breathing out when it happened, so I don't even think I was able to like
properly react.
Choking,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's that's definitely one of the most effective in the movie for sure. When did you have to close your eyes?
Yeah. So I actually look back, I regret it. I wish I'd closed my eyes more.
Yeah.
Because in hindsight, that's on me. So
might have helped.
I close my eyes when Richie goes into like the horror room of sheets because I'm like, surely this will be really scary. And then like literally nothing happens in the horror room of sheets. No. And so I felt like I really wasted my eye closing because I should have closed it at many other points. Like maybe the beginning when he's in the storm drain, I should have closed my eyes.
Yeah, right.
And then maybe in the sewer multiple times I should have closed my eyes.
Right. Wasted it on clown dolls.
On clown dolls. And you didn't even really see them because it was kind of dark in there. And then, like, even the thing that came out of the coffin wasn't really that scary. And then the door opened. I was like, all right, you guys really...
Yeah, it's more of like almost, I don't know if funny is the right word, but him opening and that being in there is more of a gag than it is like a scare at that point. Yeah, it's the reverse of the jump scare. This looked like the scariest setup I've ever seen, and this is the moment of calm in this entire horrifying scene.
Me. Yeah.
The biggest surprise in the movie.
Biggest surprise was that the kids were not floating in the sewer. They were floating in the air.
Yeah.
Because he said many times, like, we all float. We're all floating, or you're going to come float. And I was like, all right, well, you're in this nasty-ass sewer. I'm assuming they're floating in the gray water. You've mentioned gray water more times than any film has ever mentioned the word gray water.
I love, Eddie, is that his name?
Eddie the hypochondriac?
Yeah, Eddie's like little when he just gets going on stuff like that, talking about the gray water and all those kinds of things. Like, it's just he can't stop like just vomiting up his neuroses. And it's so entertaining to listen to, because often it's like we've even moved on and we're listening to somebody else's part of the scene, and he's in the background still talking about whatever it is that he's freaking out about. I love that.
He's the best.
It's very, I feel like, there's elements of this that Keo and I watched The Sandlot the other day, because it was just like the Saturday night movie on ABC or whatever, and we were like, a classic. We'll watch this. I mean, the Wendy Peppercorn scene doesn't really hold up in 2024. But other than that, stone cold classic. But one of the things that makes Sandlot so enduring is that cast of kids, and how believable they are in each of their roles, and I feel like there is, watching that and then watching it a few days later or whatever, felt very much like this is the same kind of cohesive cast of just really in the zone kid actors that you get in both of those movies that are really endearing. They're obviously a lot more like foul-mouthed and things like and that.
Sort of terrible, also, though.
Right? Yeah. But yeah, they feel very fully fleshed out and committed to. Like, those kids are those characters. It's hard to believe that they go home and that's not what they're like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. Best side character.
Yeah. None of them. Everyone was terrible.
Really,
trash. Garbage. Every character that was not a main character. Even some of the main characters were trash. Because Pennywise is technically a main character and he was trash.
That's true.
So nobody. Yeah. Everyone was the meanest person that's ever lived.
Yeah. There's really nobody outside of that principal cast who you can root for in any way. Yeah. There's not anyone who's just kind of like passively nice. Even like something like going to the pharmacist. Like, even the pharmacist is a total lech.
The pharmacist was so gross.
So disgusting. Yeah, everybody is horrendous. Nobody to root for. So no best side characters from it. Nobody to like here. And best line. What jumped out at you in this one?
Actually, I have one written down here, but then I was thinking, as we were talking about Richie, I actually thought of my favorite Eddie line. Eddie. But I love it when they see the like really creepy well, and I'm like, you're not climbing in that, surely. And they're like all climb into it. I'm like, okay, I guess we're doing this. And Richie's like, man, I wouldn't make a wish on that fucking thing. And I'm like, Richie, you're here for the quips. And I love it. Okay, you're so quippy. I'm gonna allow it. I love you.
Yeah. He's never going to be deterred from saying,
he'll never be
right.
And like at the end where you think he's like going to leave Bill, and he's like, just kidding, motherfucker, right? Like, whatever, he says something funny. But I also loved it when Eddie's like, clearly none of you have ever heard of a staph infection. It just makes me think of that little gorilla from Tarzan that's like, is this water sanitary? It looks questionable to me. And that's just his like essence, and I just love that. Totally. I'm like, honestly, I had to Google how to spell staph infection because I was like, I don't know how to say it. Oh, I just enjoyed him as a person. Yeah, so those were my two.
Definitely. Yeah, I love that a lot. Anything else before I announce to you
No,
your
just
next
let me have
film?
it.
I don't ever want to think about this ever again. All right. Well, Kristin, I told you, I'm not going to tell you all of them, but as I told you before we got on here, I have picked out the rest of the year in films because, I look at this like making a mixtape. Everything has to like flow. It has to be like pertinent to the time of year, and like the themes have to match up, all of that kind of stuff. So it's back to school time, right?
Spooky season is upon us.
It's not quite spooky season yet. I'm in back to school mode. We're almost there. And for like kids these days are like going back to school like this week. But when we were kids,
sure,
back to school was like first week of September. It was like after Labor Day.
Yeah.
And so I'm hitting you with a school movie.
Okay.
I'm hitting you with Disturbing Behavior.
Disturbing Behavior.
Starring James Marsden and Katie Holmes. This is my apology movie.
Thank you.
I think you're gonna have some fun with this movie.
Okay.
It is really, I mean, the cast of it, everyone who appears in this is much like watching I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's like every single person who shows up, you're like, oh my god, that's you've got AJ Buckley, yes, one of the ghost facers. He's in there. You have briefly Ethan Embry in this movie. Very, very briefly, but he's in it. You've got I believe Nick Stahl is in it. Like, it is
okay.
It's packed. It is a loaded movie in which we get sort of a Stepford Wives thing happening where
the behavior is disturbing.
The behavior is disturbing.
Not to put too fine a point on it,
but figure out how to get those kids to straighten up and fly right. But how are they doing it? And what are the consequences?
I guess I'll find out.
Yes, you'll find out next month on the JoAG Fancave.
Because I will come back, I guess. I was joking at the beginning, guys.
I appreciate that. I do appreciate you and being willing to do that. So for those of you who are listening, for one, give Kristin a great big thank you for your service for doing this and for agreeing to come back to us. And hey, get yourself a copy of Disturbing Behavior and watch along so that we can discuss it next month. It's a fun little ride, a polarizing one, but I feel like you're going to be on board.
Good. Great. We'll see.
We'll see, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for doing the right thing, everybody.